Zio was dazed for about 10 seconds before remembering the need to reply. She looked at the golden-masked man and nodded. "All right, I'll take note of the people Viscount Stratford interacts with." The golden-masked man seemed to sense her dazed state as he said, "There's another mission. The Church of Evernight's Red Gloves are investigating something related to the numinous episcopate. If you have any relevant information on that, immediately inform me." Zio tersely responded, unable to extricate herself from her emotions. The golden-masked man fell silent for a few seconds and asked after some deliberation, "Are you interested in directly joining MI9? You can continue maintaining your present identity, being active in East Borough." Zio was taken aback for 2 seconds as her mouth turned agape. She was momentarily unable to make a decision. The golden-masked man didn't require an immediate answer as he said with a smile, "There's no rush. Tell me your answer after you become an interrogator." After saying that, he walked back, step after step, slinking away into the shadows at the other end of the alley. That same evening, Klein snapped awake from a dream. The sole imprint he had set up in Buckland Street sewers had been touched. Who is it that isn't sleeping in the middle of the night? Is Hazel not afraid of being possessed by a wraith? Klein sighed helplessly as he took out the iron cigar case which was wrapped in a wall of spirituality from under his pillow. He then walked to the balcony where the curtains were tightly drawn. Wraith Senior rapidly leaped onto the surface of a street lamp before passing the manhole and sinking deep into the sewers. After advancing a short distance, with the eyes of his marionette, Klein saw Hazel in commoner clothes. This lady was warily walking forward as she raised her left hand without realizing it to touch the necklace with 7 emeralds. In her right hand was a charm made from gold. Although the charm hadn't been activated, it exuded the feeling of sunlight and warmth, as well as the refreshing sense of morning dew. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly recalled his encounter when strolling in the morning. Hazel had woken up early to stroll in her garden. She was gathering materials to create the sun domain charm. Morning dew? Klein guessed with uncertainty as he felt a little puzzled. This was because Hazel wasn't only half illiterate in the mysterious domain, but she also lacked quite a bit of knowledge. Furthermore, she was a believer of the Evernight goddess. Such a beyonder wouldn't receive any response if she prayed to the eternal blazing Sunday. Even if something special happened, the smallest probability event would be that of receiving punishment. As she hasn't been digging and searching in the sewers for too long, that beyonder that has been guiding her with a dream has turned anxious. That's why she was taught how to make sun domain charms via a dream. From the Marauder pathway, the corresponding high-sequence representative, Amon, is also known as a blasphemer. Does this mean that at a certain sequence of this pathway, they have the ability to pretend to be believers of other deities and circle around any defenses to obtain a response and create various kinds of charms? This does match their modus operandi. With Senor's vision, Klein watched Hazel walk deep into the sewers. Based on his spiritual intuition, although the sun domain charm was targeted at a wraith, it was far from sufficient to truly threaten a sequence 5, with it dealing a certain amount of damage at best. After all, Hazel had no way of obtaining high-level materials. However, Klein didn't let his wraith possess her again, afraid that it would alarm that beyonder who was influencing Hazel. After tomorrow's tarot gathering, he believed he would obtain a low-level item from the Marauder pathway, allowing him to make the corresponding investigations. Before that, maintaining the status quo was the best choice. Of course, the premise was that he was certain that Hazel wasn't able to dig up anything within a day or two. He had plenty of time to prepare. As a seer, he had many ways to make a confirmation. The simplest way was to head above the gray fog. After retracting his marionette, Klein took 4 steps counterclockwise and arrived inside the ancient palace which had stone columns propping it up. He conjured a pen and paper, and he wrote down the corresponding divination statement: something major will happen in Buckland Street over the next 3 days. With the topaz pendulum, Klein obtained a negative revelation. This also meant that in 3 days, no major incident would happen in Buckland Street. As for the possibility of what Hazel would really dig out, it would only affect him while being trivial to Buckland Street, he wasn't fazed. This was because something trivial wouldn't affect his subsequent plans. He didn't have any strong intentions of stopping her. He had previously given a hint to her at the ball. If Hazel didn't understand or didn't take it to heart, it was her problem. Klein didn't have any psychological burden on such matters. After returning to the real world, he waited for 45 minutes before Hazel came out. After confirming that no significant changes happened underground, Klein laid back in bed, and with cogitation, he quickly fell asleep. Monday afternoon at 3. Dark red beams of light that soared up from both sides of the long bronze table appeared before the fool Klein's, the son Derek's, and the world Gehrman Sparrow's eyes. Justice Audrey remained in a good mood as she bowed at the figure shrouded in grey fog. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool," Klein nodded with a smile as a response to this lady who often delighted him. Meanwhile, Audrey swept her gaze and discovered an additional card beside Mr. Fool's hand. A new card of blasphemy? I wonder which pathway it's from. I really wish that it's from the spectator pathway. Audrey's heart stirred as she turned to greet the other members. Once everything was done, she looked to the end of the model table ahead of the hermit Catlia and said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, I've found 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." This was actually obtained from the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation, but as its founder and main sponsor, she easily received the opportunity to make a copy. Audrey was rather proud in regards to this. She was increasingly convinced that establishing such a foundation was a wise decision of hers. Unfortunately, to not expose her identity, she didn't share this matter with the other members of the Tarot Club. Very good. Klein smiled with a nod, indicating that Miss Justice could conjure the diary. And at this moment, the hermit Catlia didn't interject, as though she hadn't obtained any new Roselle diary pages. There's temporarily no response from Queen Mystic. Or has she focused her attention on something else? Klein looked at the 3 diary pages which Miss Justice had conjured as he allowed them to jump into his palm. When he scanned them, the corners of Klein's lips nearly twitched. This was because he had encountered a familiar page of one of Roselle's sexual escapades. Compared to the pages specially chosen by Queen Mystic Bernadette that had plenty of information, the other members often obtained parts that weren't too important. The content tended to be about Roselle's daily life. The 3 pages that Miss Justice had provided was such an example. Klein casually flipped through them and discovered a diary entry that was worth a detailed read. As for the rest, it was either about him having a rendezvous with some lady or madam, or him belittling people who survived due to their status instead of intellect. He even expressed his desire for a demoness from all the rumors he heard. Soon, Klein placed his attention on the most valuable diary entry. Based on the information obtained from the church, there really are monsters in existence that are stitched at the soul level. After high-sequence Beyonders die, the Beyonder characteristics they produce will have remnants of the imprint of their soul. It can be very powerful and resilient. It might not even fully dissipate after centuries or even a millennium. But when Beyonder characteristics form a mystical item with their surrounding objects, there's a need to have a sufficiently similar soul in order to use them, otherwise, the negative effects will be extraordinary. And when such Beyonder characteristics are preserved and made into the main ingredient of a potion, the consumer similarly must have a powerful soul body to withstand it, otherwise, there's a high chance of failure. In mysticism, an advancement's failure will often lead to a loss of control or death. Only very few lucky ones can be calmed down and maintain an intricate balance. However, it's rumored that certain special sealed artifacts can draw out unfused Beyonder characteristics and recondense them. It would be akin to not having consumed the potion, so the failures will only suffer a storm-like assault on their soul. But according to my conjectures, there's likely some level of mutation at the gene level. This is because, based on the information provided, those who failed their advancement and survived by this method had mostly died from terminal illnesses within 5 years. Therefore, consuming a potion similar to one's soul body can effectively decrease the difficulty of advancements, but it will leave behind remnant soul imprints. Unknowingly, one will suffer an identity dissociation, and they would slowly transform into a monster stitched at the soul level. It's just like that high-sequence Beyonder who resurrected on his body. Resurrected, on careful thought, it's really quite terrifying. However, the church told me that there are roughly 3 methods to rid the high-sequence Beyonder soul imprints in a Beyonder characteristic. As for what they are, they didn't tell me. They don't seem simple. It's no wonder the Sauron family enjoys calling descendants who look similar to their ancestors as having talent. Talent. I have to say that I do pity Florin quite a bit. Monsters stitched at the soul level. High-sequence Beyonder soul imprints. Sounds a little alarming. So high-sequence Beyonder potions have such a problem. The churches probably have a way to resolve them. They have no lack of angels and grade 0 sealed artifacts. They can shatter a Beyonder characteristic and recondense them, thus obtaining a purified one. Those ancient families probably aren't that lucky. They might not have any more angels protecting them. They might only have 1 or 2 grade 0 sealed artifacts, but they aren't that easily used. Furthermore, different grade 0 sealed artifacts have different uses. They might not be adequate for such matters. Klein's mind raced as he made the diary pages in his hand vanish. Then, he looked at Miss Justice and asked with a chuckle, "What do you wish to exchange them for?" Audrey was waiting for her potion ingredients, and she temporarily had nothing she lacked. Therefore, without any hesitation, she chose to satisfy her curiosity. "Honorable Mr. Fool, is that an additional card by your hand, a card of blasphemy? Which one is it?" "I knew it. Miss Justice wouldn't not ask when she sees an additional card. I got through another question so easily." Klein secretly smiled as he casually flipped over the new card of blasphemy, showing it to Justice. "Tyrant." As expected, Gehrman Sparrow has handed it over. That was Mr. Fool's goal. Alger eagerly glanced at Emperor Roselle in a papal tiara as he thought poignantly. He had already obtained the cataclysmic Interra potion formula, and he knew what ritual was needed. He was in a great mood and felt that, although there were obstacles ahead of him, he was filled with radiance and hope. Audrey quickly took in the details of the card of blasphemy. Tyrant card. It looks like it's the Sailor Pathway. How I envy Mr. Hanged Man. Mr. Hanged Man doesn't seem alarmed or surprised. From a psychological point of view, his reaction should have been greater than mine. He was already aware that it was the Sailor Pathway's card of blasphemy. Eliminating all other impossibilities, this is the only explanation. But how did Mr. Hanged Man know of it ahead of time? Sequence 0, Tyrant. The potion name corresponding to the Lord of Storms is Tyrant. This Tyrant card was likely in the form of the Hierophant, however, the actual meaning has certain discrepancies with some similarities. Some of it is inversed, and some are just an extension. In short, the interpretation of the card is that of a conservative view, an emphasis on submission at the level of the soul. By relying on dominance and strength, fear is created to bring about faith. Audrey, who had liked mysticism from a young age, interpreted it as she felt a strong sense of satisfaction. She felt that the payment of 3 Roselle diary pages was especially worth it. Card of blasphemy. Being equally good at interpretation and being knowledgeable, Catlia also quickly figured out the pathway in which the card represented. She also managed to add sequence 0, Tyrant, to the gaps in her knowledge. Apart from these facts, she also made a connection. The world Gehrman Sparrow plotted the death of sea god Calvetua, thus, allowing Mr. Fool to obtain that scepter representing sea god's authority and begin answering believers in the name of sea god. This time, he obtained the Tyrant card of the Storm Pathway. It's definitely no coincidence. As she thought about the matter, Catlia was suddenly alarmed, suspecting that Mr. Fool was secretly attempting to erode away the Lord of Storm's authority. A battle between gods. It's a massive plan that has a far-reaching influence. This is one of the true goals of Mr. Fool. As thoughts flashed through Catlia's mind, she retracted her gaze and stopped looking at the tyrant card. Furs and Emlyn didn't understand much about Sequence 0. They had only heard Mr. Fool mention it once at a previous tarot gathering, therefore, they were only surprised that it was a card of blasphemy. They also began to link the name Tyrant and the Sequence 0's potion name to the Lord of Storms. The former began trembling a little, feeling as though she was being sacrilegious. As for the latter, he began imagining and guessing what was the name of the artificial vampire pathway's Sequence 0. It must be Moon. Or Crimson Moon. Emlyn's mind raced as he came to an answer. As for whether it was correct, he didn't mind it at all. He just felt that it was definitely close to the truth. Having grown up in the City of Silver, Derek had received quite a solid education in mysticism. He wasn't unfamiliar with the concept of Sequence 0, and he had even aimed his sights to becoming one at that level. Only by doing so could he bring the City of Silver out into the light and warmth, so as to bring hope and a future. This likely represents Elf King Saniathrim. So it's called Tyrant. However, his authority seems to be a little more than what the card represents. Derek thought as he participated in the ongoings of the tarot gathering in a rare instance. After showing it for 2 seconds, the Fool Klein covered the Tyrant card again before casually glancing at Ma'am Hermit. Catlia hurriedly said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, there aren't any new Roselle diary pages this time." As expected. Klein nodded gently and said with a smile, "That's all from me." Just as he said that, the World Gehrman Sparrow looked at the Hanged Man. "After this gathering, I'll send you that Ocean Songster's Beyonder characteristic. Can you find an artisan to create an easily portable mystical item, another Ocean Songster Beyonder characteristic?" The same thought surfaced in the minds of Audrey, Emlyn, and company. Powerful Sequence 5 Beyonders weren't carrots that you could easily buy on the street. And Mr. World had killed several in the past 2 months. Which quasi-high-ranking member of the Church of Storms met harm this time? Catlia started off with her conjecture at Mr. Fool was attempting to erode away the Lord of Storms' authority as she came to such a thought. Furs became increasingly fearful of Gehrman Sparrow as she kept warning herself not to use the 2 pages with demigod-level Beyonder powers. Derek couldn't help but think back to how City of Silver teams would clear a region of monsters. In that dark environment of despair, the number of Sequence 5 main ingredients and Beyonder characteristics were few and far between. There were even instances where there weren't any at times. "All right," Alger, who had already made the promise, calmly replied without mentioning the artisan's fees. This made people like Audrey and Catlia notice something. They suspected that Mr. World and Mr. Hanged Man had secretly cooperated and negotiated on certain matters. This coincided with Audrey's belief that the Hanged Man had the knowledge that the card of blasphemy was the Tyrant card, making her guess that the Tyrant card might have been one of the spoils of war that they had obtained in a private partnership. Without waiting for them to ask about anything they needed, the World Gehrman Sparrow surveyed the area whilst under Klein's control. "I have here another Beyonder characteristic of a Sequence 5 Mentor of Confusion from the Black Emperor Sequence pathway. It can be made into a mystical item, and it should possess the power to use the loopholes found in order so as to distort the words, will, and actions of a target. It can also raise one's physical state and create a certain degree of chaos and confusion to the surroundings." He described it in such detail because his target clients were Miss Justice and Ma'am Hermit. It was impossible for the 2 of them to switch to the Black Emperor pathway, so their requirements for Beyonder characteristics were naturally for a mystical item. Of course, the latter had subordinates, so it was possible to purchase Beyonder characteristics for her organization's members. Another one. And it's Sequence 5. What major event did Mr. World do last week? Audrey instantly forgot to generate interest in the Beyonder characteristic. Catlia, Emlyn, and company exchanged looks, puzzled as to which Sequence 5 Beyonder met harm again. What Alger cared about was that this belonged to the Black Emperor pathway, a Sequence 5 Mentor of Confusion. The latter was something he wasn't previously aware of. After nearly 20 seconds of silence, Audrey began to ruminate over Mr. World's words. Use loopholes found in order. Create chaos and confusion, raise one's physical state, and distort a target's speech, will, and actions. It seems to be very compatible with my dear Earl Hall. Besides, I also want to have such powers. I still have too many shortcomings just by relying on myself and lie. I should figure out the price first and find a chance to ask Father. Let's see if he's interested in buying such a mystical item for himself or his adorable daughter. Audrey thought for a few seconds before raising her hand slightly. Mr. World, what do you plan on exchanging it for? Or how much do you plan on selling it for? A reasonable price for a ready-made mystical item like Death Knell costs £10,000 to £12,000. Just the Beyonder characteristic alone will be cheaper. It will be about £7,000 to £8,000. Klein had already done the math. Now, after some thought, he made the World Gehrman Sparrow reply, £8,000. He knew that if Miss Justice was really interested, she wouldn't haggle. Okay. Audrey nodded and turned to look across the table. Mr. Hanged Man, roughly how much would it cost to pay the artisan to turn such a Beyonder characteristic into a mystical item? Alger quickly did the math and said, £1,500 at the very least. It might be higher. All right. Audrey shifted her gaze and said to the World Gehrman Sparrow, I'll consider it for a few days and give you an answer by the end of the week. You can continue asking if anyone else wants it. The World nodded in silence as he looked at the other members. He noticed that Ma'am Hermit hesitated for 2 seconds but ultimately kept silent. As for the rest, they were only watching with interest. Just as Audrey was about to ask about the fruit of the illusory chime tree, all the members heard the World Gehrman Sparrow hoarsely say, there's another sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic from the planter pathway, Druid. Suddenly, the palace that looked like a giant's residence turned extremely quiet. Apart from Mr. Fool who continued observing everyone in a leisurely manner, the Hanged Man Alger didn't show any additional thoughts. Another. When did sequence 5 Beyonder characteristics become so common? What did he do? Cadlia suddenly felt baffled. She felt that the risk and hard work she had put in over the years was, in essence, no different to the commercial goods the World Gehrman Sparrow was selling. It's terrifying. Furs had already begun imagining a series of stories. Impressive. Derek idolized Mr. World even more. Audrey and Emlyn remained silent for a long time, momentarily finding themselves suffering from a lack of vocabulary. After nearly 10 seconds, Cadlia realized the hidden meaning behind the World Gehrman Sparrow's words. He didn't mention the effects of what the Druid Beyonder characteristic can have after being made into a mystical item. He's asking me if I'll buy it for Frank. At that instant, Cadlia felt an unprecedented dilemma. As the captain of the future, Cadlia knew of the latent dangers that Frank Lee had better than anyone else. She knew that this first mate's strange ideas would at times be about truly terrifying and crazy developments. If it wasn't because those creations had yet to be proliferated and lacked the necessary elements, Cadlia believed that the world would be different. Of course, if there came such a day, she would finish off Frank Lee ahead of everyone else by feeding him to the fishes. With him lacking godhood, many things will be limited in scope even if they're considered a success. It's impossible to distribute out and bring about a greater disaster. Just advancing to sequence 5 wouldn't result in any qualitative changes, and Frank has been holding back greatly in recent times. He's been focused on researching plants that can survive and grow through the absorption of monster corpses in the darkness. As her thoughts swirled and changed in her mind, Cadlia finally made a decision. How much do you wish to get for it? She had a vague feeling that the World Gehrman Sparrow was recently in need of money. £8,000. If you can replace it with large sums of gold coins, you'll receive a discount. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief as he answered using the world. At the thought of how Frank Lee could be able to afford this sum, and how he wouldn't reject a druid's beyonder characteristic, Catlia pondered for 2 seconds and said, "Deal. Give me a week to gather the amount." "No problem." Klein got the World Gehrman Sparrow to retract his gaze. After the trip to the primitive island, if not for having garnered the attention of the existence hidden in the depths of the cathedral, he would have given himself a perfect score. In less than half a night, he had obtained an invaluable card of blasphemy, a mystical item with not less than £10,000, as well as a possible total of £16,000. Furthermore, no taxes needed to be paid. It was faster than robbing a bank. Unfortunately, that primitive island has vanished. Otherwise, I can always pay a visit when I'm lacking money. Klein's thoughts wandered as he watched Miss Justice look at Mr. Hanged Man and ask with a tone of anticipation, "Do you have the fruits of the illusory chime tree?" Audrey actually had some inkling to the answer. This was because Mr. World had obtained so many Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristics recently, and Mr. Hanged Man was suspected to have had a private partnership with him in the past week. It was unlikely that he had obtained nothing. "I can figure out certain clues from Mr. Hanged Man's satisfied and confident state." Audrey felt increasingly confident in her ability to observe others. Alger chuckled and said, "I was just about to tell you that I've already obtained the fruit." "Excellent." Audrey held back and didn't act overly agitated. This meant that she had gathered all the ingredients for hypnotist. All she needed to do was wait for her psychiatrist potion to completely digest before she attempted the advancement. And it wouldn't take too long. Having already become an antagony in the aristocrat circles in Eastchester County, Audrey thought with great certainty. To be frank, if she hadn't deliberately guided the topic of conversation, Audrey wouldn't have imagined that the aristocrats that all looked beaming with decent demeanors suffered immense stress. They had pains that others would find impossible to imagine. The changes of the times and the trends of society made them worried about the futures of their families and self. Of course, this was also related to them not being powerful aristocrats, as well as the limited resources they held on hand. These matters made Audrey truly understand the concept of a facade. She understood that faced with different targets, everyone wore a different facade. After concluding such situations, she had instantly digested a significant amount of her psychiatrist potion as her progress clearly sped up. Perhaps, in 2 weeks, more or less. In short, before I return to Backlund, I should be able to become a hypnotist. Audrey looked at Alger with bright eyes and asked, "What do you want in exchange?" Having advanced to Sequence 5 recently, and having obtained the key to the door of demigods, as well as being about to possess a potent mystical item, Alger was lacking in money the most at the moment. Therefore, he said without any hesitation, £2,000. "Deal." Audrey agreed with relatively great ease. This amount of money didn't need a reimbursement, for she could easily afford it herself. After completing the transaction, Audrey couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. She finally didn't feel like she was falling behind in the Tarot Club. During this period of time, she had watched Furs become a Sequence 7, and watched Mr. Hanged Man approach the level of a high Sequence Beyonder. She also saw Mr. World finish off one Sequence 5 Beyonder after another, producing their corresponding Beyonder characteristics again and again. Yet, she remained as a psychiatrist, a Sequence 7 Beyonder. She couldn't help but feel stressed as she became a little anxious. She relied solely on placating herself, and Susie's counseling, to prevent any emotional problems from happening. Now, she had finally taken a step forward towards becoming Sequence 6. As the delighted Audrey increasingly enjoyed the gathering, she heard Ma'am Hermit say to Mr. World, "I can provide an answer to that drop of blood from the mythical creature. Do you wish for a private communication?" The fool Klein controlled the World Gehrman Sparrow with piqued interest as he asked. "If it's solely an exchange of information, I'll make a killing out of nothing," he thought with anticipation. Cadlia looked around, and after a few seconds of thought, she shook her head and said, "There's no need. I can only provide 2 forms of payment. 1, a single glance at the Wheel of Fortune card. I believe you know what this card of blasphemy that was created by Emperor Roselle means. 2. It's to provide the means to regain a certain amount of strength during one's weak stages. Please pass this message to that angel, and ask if he is satisfied with such a payment. Provide the means to regain a certain amount of strength during one's weak stages. Queen Mystic has guessed that it's related to the Snake of Fate. That doesn't make sense. An angel includes a sequence 2 soothsayer. Can't the fool have an angel from the fate pathway serving him? I've no idea if Will Oseptin knows the way to become the corresponding pathway's sequence 0. If he is unaware, then taking one look at the Wheel of Fortune card would be an irresistible temptation. However, it's unlikely. He has lived for so long, and he's a sequence 1 at that. It wouldn't be so terrible to the point of only now grasping the ritual to becoming a god. I wonder what Roselle looks like on the Wheel of Fortune card. It has a snake with the Emperor's face and other animals. Klein casually thought as he deliberated and made the fake person, the world, say, okay. If a transaction is ultimately made, you will need to pay an additional amount. What do you want? Cadlia asked cautiously. The World Gehrman Sparrow said with a hoarse laugh, I want to meet Queen Mystic. Don't worry. The matter is very simple. There's just something that needs her help. After a moment of silence, Cadlia said, I can only try my best to facilitate it, but I can't give any guarantees. Upon hearing their conversation, Audrey suddenly found it surreal. Has the Tarot Club already matured to such a level? Aside from Mr. Fool, from us only being able to exchange basic knowledge in mysticism and sequence 9 potion formulas, it has developed into transactions involving cards of blasphemy and the blood of mythical creatures. It hadn't even been a year. It's like a dream. I've also matured significantly. As Audrey sighed, the hermit Cadlia continued looking at the World Gehrman Sparrow and said, There's some news regarding the Marauder Pathway mystical item you want. As she spoke, she requested Mr. Fool's help to conjure an item that resembled a tweezer. This tweezer was grayish-white in color, as though they were formed from 2 finger bones. Apart from that, it was relatively ordinary. Cadlia introduced, it's called Broken Finger. It can enhance the stability and agility of your wrist and fingers. It allows you to easily steal items in the pockets of your target without being discovered. The negative effect is kleptomania when worn. It costs £500. It corresponds to sequence 9 Marauder. There's a slight premium involved. Klein considered for a moment and said, all right. Let's close the transaction as soon as possible. This way, he could investigate the region dug up by Hazel in the sewers, so as to eliminate any hidden risks. After the conversation between the duo ended, Furs asked with the intention to express interest in a purchase so that she could use it when the need arose. I need a cursed item from an ancient wraith, as well as its remnant spirituality. Please help me take note. After she obtained a positive reply from the members, the Moon Emlyn sized up his surroundings and leaned back into his chair, and he said to the son Derek, Does your City of Silver have the Beyonder characteristic that corresponds to sequence 5 of the artificial vampires? He didn't wish to call the fellows covered in pus as described by the son as sanguine, therefore, he changed the way he phrased his question. From his point of view, since there were often mutated vampires appearing around the City of Silver, then obtaining 1 or 2 sequence 5 Beyonder characteristics wasn't too difficult. Furthermore, they clearly lacked the potion formula of this pathway as well as an artisan. Their retention of these Beyonder characteristics depends only on luck. Time needs to pass to determine if they would corrupt the items surrounding them, transforming into sealed artifacts. Emlyn convinced himself that he was helping the City of Silver instead of asking for the son's help. Derek was stunned as he answered in complete honesty, yes. But Mr. Moon, do you wish to be covered in pus? Ah. Emlyn's expression froze as he was momentarily unsure if the son was mocking him or warning him. Upon seeing this, Derek hurriedly added, many of them have serious levels of mental corruption, and without the potion formula, our city of silver wouldn't waste the effort to cleanse such problems. Is that so? This will be troublesome. Emlyn nodded slightly and said, got it. He didn't involve himself in possible transactions, preparing to seek advice from the upper echelons of the Sanguine to figure out the matter regarding the mental corruption of Beyonder characteristics. With the transaction segment coming to an end, the Tarot Club's members began their free exchange segment. Audrey looked straight at Gehrman Sparrow and said with some hesitation. I would like to know where the Mentor of Confusion characteristic came from. If it involves certain secrets, you can choose not to answer. She was making the preparations to convince her father, Earl Hall. It was also to avoid any unnecessary troubles. After all, Beyonders from the Black Emperor pathway might have certain connections with the military and royal family. Klein secretly laughed as he made the world answer, it comes from a curly-haired baboon. It comes from a curly-haired baboon. Audrey was momentarily unsure if Mr. World was referring to a real curly-haired baboon or someone who couldn't be considered human. In the Lone Kingdom, curly-haired baboons were a common term used to mock others, often used as a joke for low intelligence. From the looks of it, Mr. World doesn't wish to provide any further explanation. All right then, I'll just treat its origins as that of a real curly-haired baboon. Audrey didn't ask further as she said, didn't I visit a place that had the tradition of worshipping dragons while seeking out the traces of a mind dragon? But didn't you discover that the mind dragon lived in the sea of collective subconscious in the local residents? And to ensure your safety, you chose to leave. Catlia replied. You went back? Furs asked with a guess. Audrey shook her head. No, I've long left the area. I've only heard of a rumor recently. An archaeological team entered one of the villages in that area. A member suddenly went mad at night, and the mental illness seemed contagious. The other members went mad in turn as they killed each other or themselves. Eventually, not a single member survived. Alger was just about to say something when Catlia said, this matches the traits of a mind dragon. I have no doubts about that. I'm just curious if the mind dragon will remain in that region, Audrey expressed her thoughts. No, Alger and Catlia replied in unison. Sitting at the long model table, the fool Klein made a connection to something else. The anchor of the deities. He suspected that the region's tradition of dragon worship was an anchor to stabilize the mind dragon state. Before such tradition ceased its practice, that mind dragon likely doesn't need to worry about the problem of an anchor. Therefore, after it leaves, it can hide in a new region's sea of collective subconscious. It doesn't need to take risks to enter the different dreams to create faith. This way, the three churches will lack clues to finding it. After all, they aren't experts in this domain. Even with the corresponding sealed artifacts, they will, at best, only be capable of entering the sea of collective subconscious or force the mind dragon out. Instead, the psychology alchemists might be able to figure something out. As Klein thought casually, he made the world say, the tradition of dragon worship is very beneficial in stabilizing the mind dragon's condition. You can get people to take note of such matters. If large-scale changes occur, then it means that the mind dragon is creating similar traditions in other places. He originally wanted to mention that he suspected the mind dragon to be an angel, one at sequence 2, but on careful thought, he found it impossible to determine that. Indeed, when humans reach sequence 2 and reach the level of an angel, they will need the anchor of faith to secure themselves to prevent themselves from going mad. But that is a dragon in the true sense of the word, an ancient Beyonder creature. It has the madness inherited from its ancestors, and even if it's cleansed and weakened every generation, it's definitely easier for it to lose itself compared to humans. Therefore, it might be a sequence 3, or even a sequence 4 that needs an anchor to resist its inclination of losing control. That folk tradition is beneficial in stabilizing the dragon's condition? Audrey asked in doubt and puzzlement. Yes. The world didn't give an explanation aside from providing an affirmative response. Audrey subconsciously turned her head to look at the other end of the long bronze table. She began considering if she needed to consult Mr. Fool and pay the corresponding price. Upon seeing this, the fool Klein surveyed the area and said with a chuckle, "Why do you think the various deities want to spread their faith? Isn't it because God loves the world so much?" This standard and orthodox answer surfaced in Audrey's mind. Following that, she, Alger, Katlia, and the other members thought of the second answer. Stabilization of one's condition. No way. At that moment, Furs found her brain lacking. No matter how good she was at coming up with stories, there was no way she could come up with something like that. To think that's the case. No, I can't eliminate the possibility that Mr. Fool is only mentioning one of the possible reasons. He is secretly eroding away the Lord of Storm's authority. This is related to godhood. I should consult Her Majesty about this in the future. Cadlia nudged the heavy glasses on her nose bridge as she made a guess. Alger had previously seen the picture, and when he heard such matters, he no longer had that trembling sense of paralyzing fear. Instead, he began seriously considering why faith could stabilize the conditions of a demigod creature. The other members, including Derek, felt a little horrified. They felt that what they had heard was sacrilegious. They didn't dare think too deeply about it or say a word. This wasn't something that only involved the evil gods like the true creator. It had an intimate connection to the 7 orthodox deities and the existence of the City of Silver creator. The fool Klein didn't say anything further as he allowed them to maintain their silence while he appeared extremely relaxed. After about 10 seconds, Audrey forced a smile and said, "That's all I've encountered recently." What she meant was that was all from her, and it was the others' turn. Furs and Emlyn had nothing they encountered that was worth informing to the others. They shook their heads, indicating that they had nothing to say. Of course, the latter actually wished to flaunt his victory of the hunting competition that won him the ring made by the ancestor. Alger thought for a moment and looked at Gehrman Sparrow. Can that picture be shared with everyone? He believed that the picture was directly connected with certain matters that happened in Afternoon Town and the Giant King's Court. It gave the Sun some prior knowledge of what would be discovered or encountered if the City of Silver were to continue exploring. From that, he would be prepared ahead of time, allowing him to avoid danger. And it was because of this that sharing was a better choice than keeping it to himself. "I don't mind." Klein had similar considerations as he made the world reply. "What picture? It seems to be very important." "This is a picture Mr. Hangman and Mr. World saw during their partnership in finding the tyrant card." Audrey waited in curiosity. Gazes were cast over as Alger obtained Mr. Fool's approval as he conjured the picture of the City of Silver creator being eaten by the kings of angels. The bloody, sinister, terrifying, and dark picture instantly left the Tarot Club members stunned. Even the knowledgeable Katlia momentarily lost her ability to think. Who are they? What are they doing? This is way too brutal a meal, right? Us sanguine no longer do such things ever since the 4th epoch. We respect life and only drink blood. Emlyn was quite stunned by what he saw. As he had never seen the 6 statues in the Tudor ruin, he was unable to recognize the 3 figures. Back when the world shared the images of the 6 statues, he had yet to join the Tarot Club. However, he recognized the victim from the resplendent cross. He was likely, perhaps, probably the creator of the City of Silver, the legendary ancient sun god. In a previous free exchange segment, the sun had shared with them the corresponding symbols and sacred emblem of the Lord that created everything. Isn't this the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of Storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom who Mr. World once presented? Why are they eating a human? No, they are feasting on the ancient sun god, the creator of the City of Silver. Audrey was dumbstruck as she instinctively suspected if someone had distorted or blasphemed the images of the orthodox deities. As Furs trembled in fear, she found the picture that was filled with darkness and evilness to have a form of aesthetics and was of high artistic value. In her mind, she had already come up with a title for the picture, The Last Supper. Cadlia had never seen the 6 deity statues before, and she only knew the ancient sun god. She subconsciously frowned and blurted out, "Kings of angels." Yes, at least the 3 present were, Alger said without any doubts. However, he wasn't sure who the dark infant inside the City of Silver creator was. As he spoke, Alger glanced at Derek and noticed that the youth's eyes were glazed over, his thoughts a mystery. At this moment, Derek's mind was filled with misery and despair. He believed that the one being eaten was the creator which the City of Silver believed in. He had also recognized the surrounding 3 to be the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of Storms, and the God of knowledge and wisdom. This made him suspect the term, Forsaken Land of God. In the various tomes in the City of Silver, they emphasized that God had forsaken the land due to certain reasons. It made them turn into the people of the dark, therefore, as long as everyone repented from the bottom of their hearts and pleaded for forgiveness, the day would come when God would truly return to illuminate the entire world with sunlight. That's not right, no amount of repentance or seeking forgiveness can redeem the City of Silver. Derek muttered inwardly. That's because God is dead. Eaten and never to return, this meant that the City of Silver's miserable pursuits and hope were only a mirage, one that would never be fulfilled. After a long silence, Audrey said, trying to convince herself, this is a distortion of the legend of how those 3 gods were born from the soul of the Creator. 3 gods. Cadlia's and Emlyn's eyes constricted at the same time, having figured out the general meaning of the picture. They knew what alarming matter it represented. Perhaps, but there's no way to explain that infant, Alger replied. He silently glanced at Mr. Fool, and he realized that this impressive existence had no intention of speaking. All he did was watch silently. With Audrey silent, the remaining members of the Tarot Club didn't say a word either. This silence continued until Alger dispersed the picture and turned to ask Derek, "Have you investigated the matter regarding your former chief's mausoleum?" Upon hearing Mr. Hanged Man's question, Derek replied in shame, "No. I've been constantly assigned to patrol missions recently, and I didn't have the time to investigate." Alger wasn't too surprised, but he was puzzled over one thing. "Why don't you get the help of a few friends? You don't have to tell them your true motives. Split the task into very minor missions that wouldn't garner much attention. Let them search for information in different areas. This way, even if anything gets exposed, it wouldn't implicate them in a fatal way." Derek fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "I do not have friends." Before his parents died, he had a certain number of friends from general education classes and those at the combat training field. After all, there weren't many people that are roughly the same age in the City of Silver. They often got to meet each other, and they would even become teammates. However, after his parents' death, Derek had become introverted for a very long period of time. Burdened by the secret of the Tarot Club, he unknowingly distanced himself from his friends and stopped interacting with them. The last time someone visited him at home was Dark Regents who had been corrupted by the true creator. Alger choked on the son's reply. After taking a breath, he reorganized his words. "That's not a good thing. You won't be able to rescue the City of Silver just by relying on yourself. You have to unite a group of people, friends who can provide you with help during critical moments. But, this will make them be suspected," the son said hesitantly. Alger immediately said sternly, "Being suspected is better than being dead. The City of Silver is now at a dangerous crossroad. You have to carefully consider what needs to be done. It's impossible for there to be no sacrifices in such matters. There will even be a large number of sacrifices. Do you wish for their sacrifices to be worthless, or to be of value?" He didn't provide any further persuading words as he allowed Derek to inwardly struggle over what he had just said. Mr. Hanged Man is always able to find a reason to convince someone. Klein sighed and made the World Gehrman Sparrow turn his head to look at Justice Audrey. "Are you currently able to treat relatively serious mental illnesses?" His only understanding of a psychiatrist was frenzy and dragon might. He knew little about the rest, having only heard Miss Justice occasionally mention placate and psychological cue. Therefore, he wasn't sure how capable she was at treating mental illnesses. Audrey's attention was caught as she eagerly replied, "Yes, I can. There's no problem. Mr. World, do you have a friend that requires treatment? I happen to lack patience." She thought in excitement. At this moment, Emlyn raised his right hand and held it to his mouth and nose, as though he already knew the answer. Klein silently sighed and made the World said with a low chuckle. "No, I'm the one who needs treatment." The entire magnificent palace suddenly turned extremely silent. Alger, Catlia, and Furs all knew that Mr. World was a crazy adventurer, but they never expected him to have a relatively serious mental illness that brought him to the brink of complete insanity. This is the price for strength? Furs trembled as she felt increasingly afraid of Gehrman Sparrow. Communication and reasoning were still possible with a crazy adventurer, but it was impossible with a lunatic. The mental terror candle wasn't able to fully treat his mental illness. It has already reached such a severe state. Emlyn, who had expected this, felt that the world could go mad at any moment. Derek didn't think too much about it, solely feeling concerned for Mr. World. He had wanted to say that the City of Silver had a psyche analyst that could provide treatment, but realized that it would expose too many problems. All he could do was shut his mouth as he looked at Miss Justice with an expectant look. Audrey was alarmed, lost, and puzzled. She said with some deliberation, "Mr. World, based on my observation, you shouldn't have any relatively serious mental illnesses. If it's just anxiety and immense pressure, you can condition yourself and properly relax yourself to recover. There's no need for direct treatment." The World Gehrman Sparrow chuckled and said, "The reason you didn't discover it is because the mental illness from before has been treated. I'm only making a reservation. If similar signs appear again in the future, I wish to receive timely treatment." "I see." Audrey nodded in enlightenment. She suddenly felt a little pity for Mr. World. She felt that this cold reaper who had killed several sequence 5s a week was a cold and profound blessed of Mr. Fool. He was a powerful and fear-inducing beyonder, but he was also someone whose inner feelings resembled an ordinary person. He was currently suffering from immense stress and was being eaten away by various kinds of negative emotions, slowly walking into an abyss of pain. After a few seconds of consideration, Audrey sincerely said, "If you are within my reach, it wouldn't be a problem." After her coming-of-age ceremony, she had obtained a certain level of autonomy. She could spend her holidays at her parents' family castle, or stay in Eastchester County's Stone City on her own. However, this freedom was still limited. She couldn't head anywhere she wanted. Even in Stone City, there were many areas she couldn't visit. This could only be circumvented if she joined certain charitable organizations of the Church of the Evernight Goddess. All right. Having grazed a traveler, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He made the World reply, "You can confirm the location when the time comes and prepare the means to not expose your identity." Audrey tersely answered as a scene naturally surfaced in her mind. She and Mr. World would be in two separate compartments somewhere, with a wall or wooden board in between them as she conversed with him and administered treatment. In such a situation, Mr. World wouldn't be able to determine that it's me. To him, it doesn't matter as long as he's treated. This also means that if I can't make myself available, I can get Susie to do it. Mr. World definitely wouldn't believe that the one treating him is a dog. Oh, Susie doesn't know the existence of the Tarot Club. Unless it's necessary, I shouldn't get her to help Mr. World. As Audrey thought, she suddenly felt the joy from thinking up a prank as she went through a great deal of effort in order to stop the corners of her lips from curling up. After confirming this matter, Klein thought of another problem and got the World to look at Catlia. "Can you provide a crate of explosives?" He believed that as a pirate admiral, she definitely didn't lack the resources in obtaining them. "Yes." "When do you need it?" Catlia didn't ask why. With Gehrman Sparrow killing so many sequence 5s, a crate of explosives was nothing. "Send it together with Broken Finger." Klein controlled the world to say, how much will it cost? Cadlia replied without minding it, just treat it as a freebie for purchasing Broken Finger. A crate of explosives wasn't expensive at sea. They were even rather cheap. I like that. The fool, Klein secretly said as he made the world nod and then remind everyone, that picture from before, try your best not to recall it or even try to draw it when out in the real world. Audrey and the other members subconsciously glanced at the other end of the long bronze table and realized that Mr. Fool didn't say anything against it. They immediately turned serious and didn't dare to be careless. This also made Catlia's thoughts of writing to Queen Mystic Bernadette about this matter be placed on hold. She had to consider a suitable method that could avoid influencing factors. Following that, the free exchange segment slowly came to an end as the area above the grey fog fell silent. Returning back to the future, Catlia stood behind the window of the captain's cabin. She was clearly in a dilemma. Finally, she took a deep breath and exhaled. As she nudged her glasses, she left the captain's cabin and walked to Frank Lee's room. This first mate had been chased to the bottom cabin after the crew's unanimous vote. It was to prevent his experimental products from suddenly spreading. Frank Lee was rather pleased with this because his new residence was much more spacious. Furthermore, it also suited the condition of a dark environment. Knock. 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 Cadlia came to the bottom cabin and rapped at the door. Wait a moment. Frank Lee shouted a reply. It was unknown what he was busy on. After a minute, he opened the wooden door with his sleeves rolled up. He asked in puzzlement, Captain, is there something? Cadlia didn't directly answer him as she used her night vision to peep into the pitch-black interior. She saw blue fish laid on the table with their eyes wide open. From the gap between the scales, green sprouts grew out. Some were already mature with an ear of wheat. You succeeded? Cadlia held back her instinct to take a step back as she asked. Frank nodded in glee before shaking his head. Not yet. But I've already made significant progress. I've crossbred wheat, mushrooms, and a bit of a rose bishop's cells, and I achieved a first-stage product. Placing them in the stomachs of fish, they will be able to absorb the flesh and blood to grow to maturity even without any light. But the current issue is that the target is supposed to be monster corpses. There's a need to prevent the poison and madness accumulated inside to not spread to the food after their flesh and blood is absorbed. Also, producing them is a problem. There's definitely not that many rose bishops who are willing to be material. Therefore, there's a need for them to have the ability to split and absorb flesh and blood themselves. After hearing Frank Lee's description, Catlia silently nudged her glasses. Will such food begin to absorb flesh and blood and multiply while inside a human stomach after consumption? Frank Lee fell into deep thought. After a few seconds, he said, in theory, no. Because no one will eat them raw. I will have to test its activity under high temperatures. No, they still lack the ability to split themselves. It doesn't matter if they have any activity. Seeing Frank Lee in his confused state, Catlia fell into a dilemma again. After a while, she slowly asked, I have a channel that allows me to obtain a druid's beyonder characteristic. Do you need it? Ah. Of course. Frank became thrilled. Many a time, my abilities are what limit my ideas. I kind of regret it. Catlia suddenly had such a thought. Chapter 826, The Thought of Being Forgotten. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. Monday evening. 160 Buckland Street. Klein set up a ritual and summoned himself. He planned on investigating the secret hidden in the sewers. While responding above the grey fog, he was in a dilemma about the card to use, the Black Emperor or the Tyrant card. It was like the selection of clothes before heading out. In consideration of how Backland was a place where the Church of Storms was a very powerful faction, and being afraid that he would end up attracting high-sequence irascible brothers, Klein ultimately chose to use the Black Emperor card. He wore a crown and black armor with a cape behind him. Aside from this card of blasphemy, he also brought Creeping Hunger, Azek's copper whistle, Señor's gold coin, and Broken Finger, the Marauder Pathway's mystical item which Katlia had given him 3 hours ago, as well as some ordinary explosives. Of course, Klein didn't bring the entire crate of explosives. For a spirit body, it was just too heavy. He only took out 5 sticks and left Señor to hold them in his body. As for Death Knell, he had left it in his room. This was to prevent himself from having the urge to participate in a battle. He had very clear goals, so once he discovered any problems, to avoid danger, he would immediately leave and not stay behind. On the contrary, a powerful weapon would end up making him act bold, making him wish to probe deeper and resolve the matter by himself. This is Backlund. It's best that I don't create too great a commotion. As for what's hidden in the sewers, I have no way of being clairvoyant about it. I can only divine whether it will be dangerous. Klein looked at the wall clock in his room, and he confirmed that there was another hour and a half before Hazel took action like she usually did. His figure suddenly vanished as he passed through the balcony's glass and flew into the streets before entering the sewers. In the dirty and humid environment, Klein took out a lone gold coin and made Wraith Señor appear in front of him with his dark red coat and old triangular hat. Following that, he handed over the tweezers that resembled 2 ground bone fingers to his marionette. Just holding it on him for a short period of time had nearly made him steal the sewer's manhole cover. Señor held Broken Finger and walked ahead. Dressed as the Black Emperor, Klein turned invisible and walked behind, allowing his marionette to open up a gap of at least 50 meters from him. With this distance between them, he was no longer affected by kleptomania, and as a dead person, Señor also lacked the thoughts of stealing. He didn't even have any thoughts. Turning in at the corresponding fork and passing through the hidden door, Wraith Señor held the grayish-white tweezer and appeared inside the half-natural, half-artificial cave. Unlike before, the oilskin-wrapped tools like shovels had changed positions. The hidden passage on the right had deepened a little. That was clearly Hazel's main focus. Right on the heels of that, Klein, who didn't enter the fork, leaned against the water of the sewers, his back facing the target region. He controlled his marionette as he walked deeper into the right passage. Soon, Señor came to the end. At this moment, Klein suddenly felt the grayish-white tweezer in his marionette's hand tremble subtly, as though it had been attracted by some unknown object not far away. The unknown item was deep and profound like a calm ocean. It made it difficult to pry into its exact state. A characteristic that's alive, much closer to that of a spirit. Klein was only able to determine this as he immediately let Señor use Mirror Leap to return to the half-natural, half-artificial cave, onto a shovel that hadn't rusted. He didn't attempt to head deeper underground via the passage. Then, Señor appeared again, took out the 5 ordinary sticks of explosives from inside its body, and placed them in different spots. Every wraith was a demolition expert. After doing all of this, Señor's figure phased away, appearing on the surface of the gold coin in Klein's hand. As he stuffed the gold coin into his body, Klein raised his right hand, in preparation to snap his fingers and trigger the 5 sticks of explosives. His idea was very simple. It was to deliver an explosion of a suitable scale in order to destroy Hazel's hard work and traces. It would attract the Nighthawks and resolve everything. This way, regardless of what was hidden deep in the passage, it wouldn't bring him danger. In Backlund, knowing how to ingeniously sound the alarm was more effective and safer than rashly attacking by himself. This was especially so when Klein wasn't capable of determining that the matter involved a demigod. "I'm such a good citizen." As Klein gave a self-deprecating remark, he prepared to snap his fingers to ignite the explosives. Suddenly, his head swayed a little as he lowered his arm, as though nothing had happened. The cautious Klein immediately ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog. Then, he returned to the real world and entered his physical body. Just as he was about to busy himself to bring back Creeping Hunger, Señor's gold coin, and the other items from the mysterious space above the gray fog, he frowned slightly. He seriously recalled the entire process of his late-night exploration when he was alarmed to realize that he had apparently lost a small portion of his memories. He didn't remember if he had triggered the 5 sticks of ordinary explosives. As he turned his head to sense his surroundings and confirmed that the entire street was very silent, Klein began to believe that he hadn't snapped his fingers. This is a beyonder power of a dream stealer. It seems to be much stronger than Mobit. If not for the gray fog and my habit of doing an after-action review, I might not have discovered that my thoughts of triggering the explosives were stolen away. The other party might have also snapped his fingers, but without the flame-controlling powers to work in concert, nothing happened. Klein's expression turned grave as he thought, prepared to make another attempt. Similarly, to prevent himself from being tracked, he still summoned himself and responded to himself. With the Black Emperor card, Klein left 160 Buckland Street from another side, deliberately circling 2 streets away before arriving at the sewer's manhole. This time, he didn't approach the fork. Staying not far from the manhole, he used his enhanced flame controlling to sense the explosive and lifted his right hand. He raised it and lowered it as Klein rapidly ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog to prevent himself from being attacked by an unknown existence. Not in a hurry to return to the real world, he sat at the chair of the world, doing a debrief of the entire process. I forgot to trigger the explosives again. If I didn't force myself to recall this, I wouldn't have even considered such a problem. Truly quite impressive. The one that steered Hazel to the sewers to dig is probably a demigod. Why didn't he directly parasitize Hazel? Could it be due to particular reasons that he's sealed somewhere in the sewers and can only release some of his powers to drive Hazel to help him via a dream? The one that caused broken fingers to react abnormally via the law of beyonder characteristic convergence is also him. He is unable to control the signs in regards to this. Klein thought as he wrapped the corner of the long model table. After having a rough guess, he discovered that there was apparently no way of truly carrying out his original plans. This was because his thoughts would be stolen once he entered the distance in which he could use flame controlling to ignite the explosives. Even if he recalled it later, there was no way to make up for it. Considering how Hazel would be affected by her dream, Klein suspected that the limits to the person's powers didn't stop at the manhole. If he discovered that hero bandit Black Emperor was related to Dwayne Dantes, then he would lose his corresponding thoughts and memories even while sleeping in his bedroom. However, he has no way of locking onto me by passing over the gray fog. Does he think it's so easy to stop me from sounding the alarm? Klein thought as he cautiously summoned a paper figurine and used a tiny amount of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. With the ritual that had yet been terminated, he conjured an angel and forcefully created an interference effect. After doing this, he carried the Black Emperor card and entered his bedroom with his door of summoning. Klein's new plan was to head to another street, find a random house, and borrow some pen and paper to write. At the end of the 6th left fork in the Buckland Street sewers, there's a secret passage that's suspected to hide a demigod from the Marauder pathway, or something similar. Then, with the image of Buckland Street, he would plaster the piece of paper on St. Samuel Cathedral's entrance as a public notice. Of course, he would politely knock on the door to let the bishops inside sense it to prevent ordinary people from first seeing it. At times, the most primitive methods are the most effective ones. Just as Klein was about to leave 160 Buckland Street from another area, he suddenly felt a tremor as a deep rumble sounded from afar. It was ignited. The explosives were ignited. Who did it? Klein paused in surprise. It was definitely not done by him, as it couldn't have been delayed for so long. And previously, there wasn't anyone in the sewers. Even if there was someone, the thought of igniting the explosives would be stolen away. Unless a demigod happened to come. But how could it be this coincidental? There's another possibility. It was done by the demigod from the Marauder pathway. He had repeatedly stolen my thoughts before, preventing me from using flame controlling. It was to buy time to leave. Now that it's finally done, he triggered the explosives to destroy all the evidence. That adheres to logic, as he should know very well that a powerful being whose origins can't be traced cannot be stopped if he insists on sounding the alarm. The best solution is to drop its tail in order to survive, just like a gecko. However, if he can leave, why did he steer Hazel into digging the secret passage? Doing so will deal tremendous harm to him. Klein thought of certain possibilities, but he was unable to verify any of them. Furthermore, he was certain that the underground explosion was bound to have already attracted attention. Hence, he immediately left creeping hunger and other items behind, terminated the summoning, and returned above the grey fog. After returning to the real world, he stopped the ritual, cleared the altar, and cleaned all traces before getting into bed. 39 Buckland Street, Member of Parliament Mock's house. Hazel, who didn't sleep at all, was alarmed by the tremors and deep humming sound. She walked to the balcony and drew the curtains to look towards the sewer manhole. However, she didn't notice any anomalies. After observing for a while, the uncertain her had decided to cancel her operation for the night and sleep in peace. At this moment, she suddenly heard squeaking as she turned to look at the corner of her balcony. At some point in time, there was a grey rat sitting there covered in sewage water. Despite getting in bed, Klein didn't manage to sleep until daybreak. This was because he believed that, with most people stirred awake from the commotion underground, him sleeping too soundly without noticing anything would make him suspicious. Indeed, just as he got out of bed, walked to the balcony, and drew the curtains to pretend to search for the source of the commotion, Walter came knocking at his door. 2 servants with double-barreled hunting rifles were assigned to protect their employer to prevent any accidents from happening. Before long, the police arrived. Based on the descriptions of the residents in the area, they identified the sewers as the target. As for what they discovered or whether they sought backup from the Nighthawks, the ordinary citizen, Mr. Dwayne Dantes, had no idea. After confirming that there wouldn't be any more accidents, he sent his butler and servants away and quickly got some sleep. By the time he woke up again, Buckland Street had been restored to normal. Pedestrians were on the streets, and the carriages were coming and going. The Intis parasol trees that lined the side of the street continued making the area seem tranquil. Are the results of the investigation out? Klein looked at himself in the mirror as he asked Richardson, who was helping him smooth his clothes. Richardson had already inquired about the matter and was waiting for his employer to ask. He immediately replied, apparently some gang members were trading firearms in the nearby sewers and accidentally triggered an explosion. What a reasonable explanation. Klein didn't probe deeper, nor did he consider where the demigod of the marauder pathway who stole away his thoughts went to or if the Nighthawks found him. Firstly, this was because he believed that the demigod's action of igniting the explosives would definitely implicate him in a serious manner. If the demigod had the ability or suitable environment to do so, he would have long parasitized Hazel without going through the convoluted and troublesome hassle. This also meant that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, or even 2 to 3 months, Klein didn't need to worry about the demigod. Secondly, if he continued pursuing the matter and pushed the demigod into a corner, Klein had no doubts that he would be harmed as a result. Once the demigod lost all inhibitions and began affecting the surroundings on a large scale. Then, even if he didn't expose himself, he would suffer the demigod's attack, as well as implicate the innocent residents along the street. Apart from the first 2 reasons, Klein was apprehensive over the matter. If anomalies kept happening in the originally normal Buckland Street, it was bound to attract a deeper level of suspicion from the official beyonders. And all of this happened after Dwayne Dantes moved in. Even if Klein's body was covered in mouths, there was no way he could explain himself. When the time came, he would have to give up on his plans and reconsider new ones. I shouldn't head into the sewers for the time being. There's probably a trap laid by the official beyonders. There's one thing to do. Take note of Hazel without leaving any clues. I'll observe to see if there are any abnormalities about her, and once I discover any dangerous signs, I'll immediately turn into hero bandit and put up advertisements at St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein went downstairs to have breakfast with a composed look. After doing so, he returned to his master bedroom and got Richardson to wait by the door. As for himself, he took out the almost torn paper crane from his wallet. He planned on using it one last time and informed Snake of Fate Will Septon of the choices that Admiral of Stars was offering him, and if he was agreeable or not. Typically, he could complete such matters by visiting his parents. However, without Dr. Aaron's invitation, and him lacking a sufficient reason to pay a visit, that wasn't the best choice, as it easily made others question his motives. He obviously couldn't tell Dr. Aaron that he wasn't there for him, but for the fetus in his wife's womb. After carefully unfolding the paper crane, Klein glanced at the pencil marks left on it. His intuition told him that, as long as he used an eraser, the paper would definitely tear. However, this didn't stump him. He got a black fountain pen and directly wrote on it, "The other party has made their offer." The black ink was a lot more obvious than the pencil marks, therefore, although the text overlapped, it didn't affect anyone from recognizing the words written on it. There are always more solutions than problems. Klein nodded in satisfaction as he folded the unfolded piece of paper according to its crease marks. This time, he suspected that unfolding it again would result in it tearing. In the Berg household in the City of Silver. Ever since the tarot gathering ended, Derek was like a petrified statue who sat by his bed, motionless. After an unknown period of time, he was awakened by the noise on the streets outside. However, the feeling that he was still in a nightmare continued enveloping him. It made his footsteps towards the window appear especially heavy. God might already be dead. God might not return again. Such thoughts kept resounding inside Derek's mind as he felt an irresistible sense of despair and pain. Back when he had to kill his parents with his own hands, he had already suspected if God would return or show his blessings to his forsaken people of the dark. He later thought of relying on Mr. Fool, allowing himself to become the true son and help the people of the City of Silver to escape their cursed fates. However, having been educated from a young age and the environment constantly affecting him, he still looked forward to the return of the Creator. He held expectations that sacrifices and the repentance of the City of Silver would earn them a response. And now, all his hopes had been dashed. The tiny sliver of hope that was left had now been engulfed by the darkness. The City of Silver will continue in this state until it disappears into the darkness. There will be no one remembering that we once existed and struggled. Derek cast his gaze out the window and saw many of his neighbors gathered together. They were praying and seeking forgiveness from the Lord that created everything. This wasn't a ritual organized by the 6-member council, but a tradition that took form in the City of Silver after 2,000 to 3,000 years. They would pray for almost anything: good developments, unstable emotions, an injury in the family, and the birth of new life. Lightning streaked across the sky and illuminated the streets. Derek stood motionless in the darkness of his room, staring outside in a daze. Unknowingly, he clenched his fists. By the time his neighbors dispersed, he finally retracted his gaze, his expression somewhat warped. He reached out to touch Thunder God's roar as his gaze gradually focused. He planned on following Mr. Hanged Man's advice to befriend others to help him. Soon, he felt a little stumped because he had no idea how to make friends. Nor did he know how to warmly greet others or find a topic of conversation. This was in violation of his own character. After some thought, Derek decided to head to the training field and use combat to re-establish ties with people he was familiar with in the past. That was a gathering ground for the residents of the City of Silver where he often met people he found familiar. It was late at night once again. Klein once again saw the pitch-black steeple and desolate plains in his dream as he had desired. Passing through one obstacle after another, he arrived at the region with the scattered tarot cards. A black pram was already waiting there. Will Septon, who was wrapped in silver silk, asked with a bright voice, "What are the choices? You are being very proactive this time. What happened to your reservation as a sequence one? However, kids are like that. It's good that you maintain such a state of mind." Klein silently chuckled as he said, 2 choices. Choose either one. 1, it's to take one look at the Wheel of Fortune card. 2, it's the method to regain a certain amount of strength during your weak stages. Will Auceptin fell silent for a second and chuckled. So it's Bernadette on the other side. My intuition was right after all. I'll be able to obtain something good this time. Following that, he asked, which choice do you think I'll choose? Klein's subconscious idea was, I have a chance of posing a question once. Then, he said with a self-deprecating laugh, 2. Will Auceptin sked and said, do I look like a mythical creature that doesn't have such methods? I've already restarted so many times. I definitely have the right state of mind to make preparations. Reasonable. Klein nodded and said, you wish to take a look at the Wheel of Fortune card? Or do you want them to switch the choices? Will Auceptin sucked at his thumb and said, I choose 2. Klein's expression froze. Will Auceptin smiled and said, knowing one more method means one more trump card. Isn't that the right thing to do? Yes, whatever you say is right. Klein replied in exasperation, all right. When can you complete the transaction? Will Auceptin waved his short arms and said, of course it's when I'm born and have the placenta blood. This will probably be in early July, but it might be brought forward. Having said that, he relaxed his limbs as he chuckled. I wouldn't mind it either if they wished to hand me the method ahead of time. They? Klein subconsciously asked, unsure how the Snake of Mercury knew that it was they and not her, Queen Mystic, Bernadette. Will Auceptin sucked at his thumb and said indiscernibly, Bernadette has already passed that stage. The stage, that needs a drop of mythical creature blood, is likely being prepared, for her subordinate. Is that the case? Ma'am Hermit needs it? Klein asked thoughtfully, what is that drop of mythical creature blood for? The main ingredient of some potion? He connected it to the fact that a drop of divine blood from the eternal blazing sun could be used for the unshadowed potion's main ingredient. No, isn't it suicidal for other pathways to consume the blood of a fate pathway mythical creature? Will Auceptin said with a scoff. I heard that to advance from sequence 5 to sequence 4 for the mystery prior pathway, there's a need to completely analyze a drop of a mythical creature's blood and, from there, obtain complicated and massive amounts of knowledge. This is part of the ritual. As the mythical creature blood used is different, what they will be proficient at during the mysticologist stage will also differ. To think that's possible. The rituals of the different pathways and different sequences all have their unique traits. Klein bowed in enlightenment and said, thank you for your answer. Will Auceptin waved his hand and said, stop disturbing me. Letting me be born in peace is the greatest form of gratitude. Without waiting for Klein to answer, he added, giving me that method doesn't count. With that said, the black pram retreated and entered the shadows before vanishing. Klein watched the surrounding walls collapse as he silently heaved a sigh of relief. He planned on escaping to sleep again. At this moment, he froze because he discovered a new power infiltrating his dream. Another one is coming just after one left. This is more lively than in the day. As Klein changed the dream according to his wishes, he pretended to look around in a daze. Chapter 828, Movement of the Night Translator. Atlas Studios editor, Atlas Studios Klein had set the dream to be that of 160 Buckland Street. He produced many beauties that circled around Dwayne Dantes. He did this to perfectly create the image of a knowledgeable and experienced tycoon who could only let go in his dreams while holding back in the real world to uphold his reputation. Sitting on a sofa and receiving a cup of red wine from a young lady, Klein found his surroundings suddenly change before he could even taste it. It turned from his brightly lit villa filled with elegant beauties to a dark, humid, and dirty sewer. Following that, he saw 5 familiar explosives in his hands. Aren't these the ones I placed earlier? Klein was first taken aback as he pretended to jump in fright, throwing away the explosives as he looked around warily. Noticing that there weren't any other abnormalities, he retreated one step at a time until he felt his way to an upright metallic ladder. He decisively climbed up, moved the manhole cover away, and left the sewer. As he returned to Buckland Street, his dream shattered as he woke up. Klein opened his eyes and found himself in a dark room. As he looked at the ceiling adorned in gold, he recalled his encounter. This was done by that marauder Pathways demigod. He escaped the pursuit of the Nighthawks and is still hiding nearby. As he's afraid that the Black Emperor who exposed his whereabouts would appear again, he began steering dreams to seek out his target. Very possible. If it wasn't because I can maintain my reason and lucidity when others infiltrate my dreams, I might have been driven by my subconscious to place the explosives again. After all, this is something I've done before, and the memory is still fresh in my mind. Thankfully, I concluded the principle that a marionettist should try to hide behind the scenes. Be it my exploration of the sewers, or meeting with Trissy, I had relied on my marionette. Even if it's because of the distance, I didn't choose to do it personally and had instead used my spirit body with the grey fog as a proxy while carrying items that can interfere with the prying of secrets and divination, making it impossible to determine who is the true mastermind. I would have long been discovered and targeted. Even if I didn't die, I would have to flee Buckland in a pathetic manner. Upon thinking of this, Klein felt relieved. In the beginning, he wasn't certain of the secret hidden in the sewers. He had never expected it to be a demigod, but he had abided by the marionettist's principles and followed his strict requirements. Hence, he avoided the tragic outcome of having his act exposed. Buckland really is a dangerous place. Any mistake can result in trouble. As Klein reflected over the matter, he felt that his marionettist potion had unknowingly digested a little. After he composed himself, he chuckled inwardly. It appears that demigod is still in Buckland Street. He's probably hiding in Hazel, or maybe even by her side. If that demigod had infiltrated my dream a minute or two earlier, he would have met Snake of Fate will accept him. Although this sequence one angel is still in a weak phase, that's only relative to other angels like Ouroboros. Faced with a sneaky demigod who can't even parasitize Hazel, there likely won't be any trouble. Ignoring the other powers, just revealing a full mythical creature state would be enough to deal tremendous damage to a demigod who's equally weak. I dare to bet that Will Septon must have sensed it ahead of time to choose that time window to come out, thus, successfully avoiding an encounter with any other demigods. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make that marauder demigod understand how dangerous it is to randomly infiltrate dreams in Buckland. Leonard definitely knows this very well. Klein reined in his thoughts and pretended as though nothing had happened. With cogitation, he fell asleep again. It was only when the sun rose high in the sky that he woke up naturally. He sat up, transformed into Gehrman Sparrow, and prayed, "Please inform Ma'am Hermit that the angel has accepted the method to regain a certain amount of strength during one's weak stages. He has agreed to complete the transaction in late June or early July. You can also ask Bernadette about when I can meet her." After completing the prayer, Klein transformed back into Dwayne Dantes, got out of bed, and entered the bathroom to wash up. After brushing his teeth and washing his face, thus, becoming abnormally alert, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the grey fog. He then threw the scene of the prayer into the crimson star representing the hermit. On the docked future, Cadlia watched Frank Lee step on the dock while filled with anticipation. He planned on finding some place to sell his items and save up £8,000 to purchase the Druid Beyonder characteristic. She couldn't help but raise her hand to her forehead, feeling an inexplicable lack of confidence. Although she believed that she could suppress Frank Lee, even if he was a druid, thanks to her strength, mysticism knowledge, and mystical items, just the thought of his strange ideas, as well his terrifying ability to put them into action, made her feel that the problem wasn't that simple. She didn't wish for a watermelon to grow on her head or participate in the taro gathering above the grey fog while covered with ears of wheat. Thankfully, he still doesn't have the druid potion formula. For now, I don't have to worry about him advancing to sequence 5. Cadlia nudged her glasses as she comforted herself. At this moment, an illusory fog emanated in front of her as Gairman Sparrow's voice sounded in her ears. That angel agreed. Cadlia's expression softened as she couldn't help smiling. Once she obtained that drop of mythical creature blood, it meant that she was very close to the realm of a demigod. She already had the mysticologist potion formula. She has also completed the necessary conditions to exchange for a main ingredient from the Moses ascetic order. She also knew of the channel to obtain the other main ingredient, as well as the method to obtain it. I just need to wait until July. July. Cadlia pursed her lips as her gaze penetrated the thick glasses while she surveyed her captain's cabin. Thursday afternoon. Just as Klein finished a class on ancient literature, he heard the illusory, "Stacked please." After heading above the grey fog, he discovered that the supplicant was the hermit Cadlia. Admiral of Stars had requested Mr. Fool to inform the world that Queen Mystic had agreed to his request. If he was in Backlund, they could meet near the entrance of the bridge on the south bank of the Tussock River at 11 in the evening. Bernadette is still in Backlund. Klein conjured Gairman Sparrow and gave a confirmatory answer. At 10:58 p.m. he entered his bathroom and took out a paper figurine from his pocket. Pa! Klein shook it and made the paper figurine turn into a Dwayne Dantes who sat on the toilet with a book in hand as though he was daydreaming. Then, he shortened himself by about 4 centimeters. His face turned thin as his facial contours became more pronounced. He had transformed into Gairman Sparrow. Right on the heels of that, the glove on his left hand turned transparent as countless illusory figures appeared within. Following that, Klein saw the surrounding colors saturate before turning well separated and stacked. His body then phased away from the real world. He quickly traversed the spirit world, and, based on his location, kept adjusting his trajectory. In just a few seconds, he appeared at the south bank of the Tussock River where the Backlund Bridge entrance was. At that moment, it was already late at night. There was no one on the bridge, and it was extremely silent. The only thing that could be seen was a platoon of soldiers guarding the bridge a short distance away. Klein was just about to find Queen Mystic Bernadette's traces when he suddenly saw green pea vines droop down from the sky, interweaving to form a lush forest. This forest didn't have a peak as the veins formed different paths that either intersected or spiraled before extending high into the sky. Klein was taken aback for a second as he casually found a pea vine and hung over a tiny trail in midair before taking steps forward. After an unknown period of time, he saw that the green plants were connected to a seat that resembled a hammock. It was gently shaking above him. Queen Mystic was sitting there, wearing a white inta-styled shirt and a dark black jacket. By her waist was a thin rapier. Other than not wearing a triangular hat, she was dressed like a standard pirate captain. She didn't only reveal her black leather boots like she did back when she interacted with Sherlock Moriarty in Backlund. At that moment, her chestnut hair cascaded down as her blue and deep eyes looked over. She gently said without any emotion, "Thank that existence behind you on my behalf. So you are still quite respectful towards the fool." The few answers I previously gave her had likely resolved some of her confusion. With the mask of Gairman Sparrow on, Klein politely replied, "All right." Bernadette's eyes didn't shift as she continued looking at him. "Is there something this time?" Klein paused for a second as he said the words he had already prepared, "I wish to receive your help in reproducing the prolonged state of being contaminated by the core seal's power behind Cheney's gate of the Church of Evernight." As he spoke, Klein made Wraith Senior appear beside him. Bernadette looked deeply at the upright Admiral of Blood. Without asking Gairman Sparrow how he knew that she had the means, she calmly said, "The core seals in the different cathedrals of the Church of Evernight are different. The state of contamination will also be different. Is it the Evernight pathway, the death pathway, or something else? Is it a main diocese cathedral, or a typical central cathedral in a city?" She had directly eliminated the option of the Church of Evernight's headquarters, the Cathedral of Serenity. This was because even a king of angels wouldn't cast their sights on it. Klein thought for a moment before saying, Diocese Cathedral. Evernight Pathway. Bernadette nodded gently and said, then, I can allow him to suffer the corresponding contamination, but doing so will basically destroy this marionette of yours. It can still be used normally in the beginning, but with the passage of time, the contamination will worsen. He will slowly fall asleep, never to awaken. Can the time it takes for the complete contamination be pushed back? Klein asked, holding back the pain of potentially losing a marionette. Senor was one of the most valuable assets he had. Bernadette said with a calm expression, 2 months is the limit. Klein struggled inwardly for 2 seconds before replying in a deadpan manner, all right. He then pressed his hand to his chest and bowed. Thank you for your help. Bernadette didn't say a word as she retracted her gaze. She extended her right hand as words that were written in Jotun, Dragonese, Elvish, and ancient Hermes appeared in midair. These words interwove into strange symbols with a star-like radiance, as though they were opening a secret door that led deep into the spirit world. With the secret door opened, a gust of wind blew, conjuring the upper body of a man that was covered in white cloth. Sleep bugle, Bernadette said gently but sternly. The man who had a torso and wind for his bottom replied reverently, pulling out a human skull from the white cloth. The skull's eye sockets were deeply recessed and dark, it was impossible to see the bottom. The rest of the skull was covered with holes of different shapes and cracks. It was white like a piece of jade. Bernadette took the sleep bugle and glanced at Gehrman Sparrow. Go back at least 50 meters. Klein didn't ask why as he left Senor in his original spot, and he quickly distanced himself along the pea-vine path. After exceeding 50 meters, he suddenly heard a distant and serene melody that was filled with sorrow and gloom. Subconsciously, Klein looked up at the area covered by the pea-vines. Bernadette was sitting with her back slightly hunched. Her chestnut hair was fluttering as her head was bowed. She had placed the human skull to her mouth, letting the orifices produce an airstream that appeared like the orchestrated movement of the night. The movement brought with it the power of calmness and faint melancholy. Bit by bit, it spread out without alarming the soldiers guarding the bridge beyond the pea-vine forest. Klein stood there and listened seriously when he suddenly had a pining for home. That was home, something that a traveler who had been drifting for a long period of time yearned for the most but was unable to touch. In the dark night, and within the green vine forest, Klein closed his eyes as he listened to that musical movement that was emitted from the sky. He felt calm in both body and mind, but he felt a faint sense of depression and sadness grow, emanate, and resonate. After an unknown period of time, the soothing melody finally disappeared as the hanging pea vines gently swayed in the night wind. Klein sighed silently as he opened his eyes and looked up. He saw that Queen Mystic Bernadette had handed over the orifice-filled human skull back to the servant that was half man, half wind. It's done. Bernadette's gentle and calm voice sounded. Thank you for your help. Klein bowed once again as he controlled Wraith Senor to return to his side. At this moment, the pea vines retracted upwards and slowly turned faint. Soon, the green forest vanished. Klein and Senor simultaneously landed at the entrance to the bridge. There was no one around this silent area, apart from a platoon of soldiers whose backs were facing him. There was nothing different from before. The fairy tale-like scene from before was like an illusion. Only then did Klein have the time to observe his marionette. He discovered that his marionette appeared more like a dead man than before. His face was pale and his aura cold. He gave off an obvious sense of gloom. This is likely the result of a single high dosage of contamination. If it's just guarding Cheney's gate for 1 to 2 times a week, with each duty happening during the day, it wouldn't be this serious. It's impossible that 2 months is the limit. If that's the case, even if it's the church of an orthodox deity, it won't be able to afford such losses. I expect a normal keeper to live for several years, or even more than 10 years. However, it's easy to mutate midway and lose control. Sigh, they likely already know of the outcome when they chose to become keepers. Klein felt poignant as he made Senior project himself onto the gold coin inside the iron cigar case. Following that, he used traveling to head out to sea. After selecting food for creeping hunger, he returned to his master bedroom's bathroom in 160 Buckland Street. 5th June. Sunday. Inside the Hall family castle. Audrey was sitting in front of a study desk as she admired the sight of the mystical item she had just acquired. Its outer appearance was that of a black fishnet glove that reached the elbow. It appeared to be a product of the royal family that came with a sense of magnificence and elegance. This was the item the artisan had made after some time, using the mentor of confusion beyond her characteristic she had obtained from the world Gehrman sparrow. Audrey had previously asked her father, Earl Hall, and obtained the answer, "You can buy it and use it for yourself." Having such filial thoughts is already good enough. Hence, she specially instructed Mr. Hanged Man to get the artisan to make it into an item that could be carried around by a lady. This also made her suspect if her father had better mystical items, or if the Church of the Goddess provided him rather high-level protection. Based on the Hanged Man's description, this fishnet glove gave the wearer several beyonder powers. One of them was the enhancement of one's dignity and body, making surrounding beings lower their own standing to submit themselves without realizing it. Another was distort, the ability to distort a target's words, actions, and intent. It allowed one to formulate a certain order that provided them with an advantage. The third was bribe, which bribed them via a symbolic gesture. It allowed the target to feel a great sense of fondness, making it difficult to have any thoughts of animosity or even wish to fight the wearer. If the conditions were suitable, the person who received the bribe had an extremely small chance of attacking their companions. Audrey heard from Mr. World that this was one type of bribe beyonder powers that was known as bribe, charm. The last was to produce a chaos effect on a target or surrounding area, making it difficult for attacks to land on the wearer, and making the enemy easily choose to make the wrong judgment. Audrey was very satisfied with these effects. However, what vexed her was that the artisan's level was lacking. The Sequence 5 mystical item he created had relatively serious negative side effects. First, it would make the wearer's psyche slowly grow dark, making them often wish to take shortcuts, use schemes, or dishonorable methods to complete matters. Second, the wearer would enter a state of chaos after wearing it for more than 3 minutes. Audrey had tried it previously, and she had made a mistake without realizing it when she was bathing. The normal procedure was to let her maidservant fill the bathtub with water and adjust the temperature before she took off her clothes, enter the bathtub, and then finish washing up. However, Audrey had first entered the bathtub, filled it with cold water, and waited until her clothes were wet before she remembered to take them off. The only thing she was thankful about was that she had eventually controlled herself and hadn't called her lady's maid in to witness such an embarrassing matter. This makes me feel like a curly-haired baboon. Audrey thought in embarrassment and anger. She found the first negative effect acceptable because she was a psychiatrist. She could often check on herself and eliminate her dark thoughts. Furthermore, she had Susie to provide her with help as an onlooker. However, the second negative effect was completely unacceptable. The second negative effect is just too problematic. All I can do is bring it with me. I'll wear it at critical moments. Ah, right, I still have lie. It will amplify my emotions, so combined with the glove, it will only worsen the darkness in my heart. The current me might not be able to withstand it. Audrey's green eyes darted around as she tried thinking of a solution. At this moment, she heard knocking at the door. Her maidservant, Annie, said from the outside, "Miss Audrey, the Lord wishes to talk to you about something." Audrey left the black fishnet glove on the door as she stood up and came to the door to open it. Earl Hall, who didn't wear a coat at home except for a shirt and matching vest, touched his beautiful beard and said with a chuckle, "Are you not ready? We'll be returning to Backland in a while. Tomorrow night will be your 18th birthday party." As he spoke, Earl Hall looked at Annie and company, indicating that they should retreat. Sigh, it's the annual socializing season again. Audrey nodded, feigning her maturity. Earl Hall glanced at his daughter and asked with a laugh, "Have you thought of how you can make use of that item yet?" Audrey pursed her lips into a smile. "Of course. I plan on folding it up and putting it into a bag. Susie will carry it. This way, as she didn't wear it or use it, Susie wouldn't find herself in any situations of chaos and confusion, and its dark psychological problems could be treated by Audrey with placate. More importantly, without lies amplification, Susie, who was also a psychiatrist, could also check on herself inwardly and regulate her mental state from time to time. Earl Hall was taken aback as he praised with a surprised smile, "That's a smart solution." Audrey felt smug, but she said in a reserved manner, "I plan on calling it the Hand of Horror. Dear Earl, thank you for the birthday present. In a few more days, I can concoct the potion and attempt an advancement." Audrey added inwardly in joy. Sunday night. 160 Buckland Street. Klein stood on his balcony as he peeped at the street through the gap in the curtains. He couldn't help but feel somewhat nervous. If nothing unexpected happened, he planned on beginning his plan of stealing the Antigonus family's notebook in a while. With Queen Mystic Bernadette's help, he had made his marionette enter a contaminated state. From his frequent visits to the cathedral for praying, Bible studies, and donations, he had figured out the keeper's duty roster. There was only one thing left that was necessary for the preparations of Klein's theft. That was to secretly replace his target without anyone noticing it. Based on Klein's understanding of the situation, the keepers would head underground at daybreak. And it was during such times when the cathedral remained close. To directly infiltrate inside ran the risk of being discovered by a demigod like the diocese's archbishop. It could be said that there was no chance of success. Therefore, Klein's plan was to infiltrate the cathedral one day earlier and patiently wait for an opportunity. This undoubtedly needed a sufficient disguise, but this didn't stump a faceless. After observing for some time, Klein discovered that the church held a major mass on Sunday night. This was because Sunday and the night were symbols for the goddess. And after the mass ended, the servants would be busy clearing the trash and throwing them outside. Klein's plan was to seize this opportunity to knock a servant unconscious and enter the cathedral while disguised as the servant before sleeping in the servants' quarters. For this, he had even purchased a dosage that was able to let a person fall into a deep sleep for 10 hours without causing any physical harm. He bought it from Emlyn for £5. Phew. After a few minutes, Klein slowly exhaled as he drew the curtains. He walked back to his bedroom, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog. Sitting in the fool's chair, he thought in silence for a minute before conjuring a pen and paper. He wrote the divination statement, "This theft of the Antigonus family's notebook will be dangerous." After putting down the dark red fountain pen, Klein removed the spirit pendulum from his left wrist. Using his left hand to hold the chain, he let the topaz hang down over the paper in close proximity with it. He entered cogitation, closed his eyes, and silently chanted the divination statement. After repeating it 7 times, he slowly opened his eyes and saw the spirit pendulum spinning clockwise with an ordinary amplitude and frequency. "There's danger, but it's within an acceptable range." Klein quickly made an interpretation. In fact, he was a little worried if his divination was being interfered with, just like how the Mother Tree of Desire had done so. However, he had no way of verifying it, much less falsify the possibility. Therefore, when the divination outcome, plans, and preparations satisfied the required conditions, Klein had made up his mind. He looked at the hanging topaz that slowly came to a halt. In Chinese, he said in a heavy voice, "A strung bow is poised to strike." Before he finished his sentence, Klein let his spirituality envelop himself as he simulated the feeling of falling, and he returned to the real world. This time, he planned on only bringing 3 items with him: creeping hunger, Señor's gold coin, and Azek's copper whistle. The characteristic they had in common was that they could be stored inside an iron cigar case. He could use paper angel and a wall of spirituality to provide a double layer of screening. As for the other items, there was a high chance that they couldn't pass through Cheney's gate, as they could easily trigger an anomaly at the core seal. Therefore, Klein had left the rest of his items, as well as his money, above the gray fog, prepared to immediately flee if anything went wrong. It's just that the 3% coin company shares worth £12,800 is tied to Dwayne Dantes' identity. Klein quickly reined in his thoughts, picked up a mirror, and placed it on the pillow. Following that, he drew the mysterious symbol used for summoning erodes. The mirror on Klein's pillow glowed with an aqueous luster as silver points of light gathered to form Loanese words: "Exalted Great Master, your loyal and humble servant, Erodes, is constantly at your service." Klein stood beside the bed and looked at the mirror before calmly asking, "Where is the Antigonus family's notebook located behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate?" He wanted to confirm the location so that he could directly head for his target and complete his plan in the shortest time possible. Through this, he could avoid all kinds of accidents. Silver text distorted and changed on the mirror's surface, forming a new line of text. "It's a Grade 1 sealed artifact. It will be on the right in basement 2. I can't see anything more specific." Klein tersely acknowledged as he said, "It's your turn to ask." Erodes immediately dispersed the silver words and presented a new question: "What other instructions do you have?" If this were any other time, Klein definitely would have secretly sked, but his high-strung mind made him nod. "Just watch over my illusion like before to deal with any accidents." "All right, Master." Erodes didn't hesitate to give an answer as it hurriedly added, I will hold back my instincts. I swear to you, the great ruler above the spirit world." Klein nodded gently, took 2 steps forward, and made the mirror look like Dwayne Dantes. The image became clearer and bigger until it looked real. After some slight adjustments, Klein made it lie in bed as though it was already sleeping. At this moment, he saw Dwayne Dantes turned his head over and smiled at him with a toady look. At the same time, he reached out his hands and pulled the blanket towards his head. Without a word, Klein transformed into the cold and crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, as creeping hunger on his left hand turned transparent. His body rapidly phased away as he traveled to the other end of Phelps Street where St. Samuel Cathedral was. Following that, he walked to the square filled with pigeons in the day, and he hid himself in a corner under the guise of the shadows. A short while later, a batch of believers who had attended Mass came out of the cathedral. Before long, servants began leaving the cathedral with all sorts of miscellaneous items, walking to the trash bins in an alley. A number of people were dealing with the feces that was found at the spot where the carriages parked at. At this moment, a servant's body suddenly trembled before he bowed his head. He seriously began cleaning the area, and he even proactively walked towards the square as though he wanted to clean the trash there. He slowly opened up a distance from the others until he came to a shadowy area. When the other servants stopped placing their attention on him, a hand suddenly outlined itself and reached out of the void, grabbing him by the shoulder and causing his body to phase away into nothingness. Klein had directly traveled to a cheap 2-bedroom condominium in East Borough. He had teleported over a few days ago with another identity to rent it. A traveler's ability is really convenient. The only problem is that I need to have a pirate sacrifice his life every time. Klein lampooned to relieve his anxiety as he made the servant lie in bed. Then, he took out a long metal vial and threw it at him. The servant caught it and pulled out the stopper before gulping down the soporific medicine in it. In a few seconds, he fell into a deep slumber as Senor surfaced to the side. Klein observed the servant on the bed as his body suddenly softened like he had transformed into a slime monster. However, he didn't collapse into a pool. After some swaying, he instantly shortened his height by 15 centimeters as his skin darkened in color. His facial features moved, and soon, he had transformed into the servant. And at this moment, Senor had already taken off the servant's clothes. Without wasting any time, Klein quickly changed into those clothes and moved the items from the iron cigar case over. Picking up the broom and surveying the area before confirming that there weren't any problems, he made Senor return to the gold coin before Klein lowered his left arm and spread his fingers. He watched as creeping hunger produced an indescribable transparency effect. After teleporting back to the shadowy corner, Klein bent his back and began cleaning the area seriously. Step by step, he approached the busy servants but maintained a distance from them to prevent anyone from chatting with him, which would increase his chances of being exposed. After about 30 minutes, the servants gathered together and entered St. Samuel Cathedral and turned into a side door. At a distance away from the priests, a servant stretched his arms and said, "How tiring." Klein pretended to look uninterested in the conversation due to his fatigue as he tersely nodded without participating in the conversation. Soon, they returned to the servants' quarters. It comprised of 2 rather big rooms, with many bunk beds inside. Beside each bed was a wardrobe and chest. Klein was immediately at a loss. He didn't know whether to head left or right. Thankfully, he was a seer. He could solely rely on his spiritual intuition on matters that didn't involve beyonders or mysterious domains. Furthermore, he was still holding onto a broom. Hence, he pretended to have his hand slip and secretly did a dowsing rod seeking. He received a revelation that he should head right. When he entered the room on the right, Klein deliberately slowed down a little, observing the actions of the other servants. Then, he mimicked them by placing the broom in the region behind the door. Then, he went outside to the common bathroom to wash his face, rinse his mouth, and wash his feet. After he completed all of this in a slow manner, the bed that belonged to him revealed itself, the bed that wasn't occupied. Lying in bed, Klein finally felt relieved as he secretly sighed in relief. The servants were all exhausted and before long, they fell asleep, producing a symphony of snores. Klein maintained his consciousness and very slowly removed creeping hunger. Folding it up into a tiny shape, he stuffed it inside the iron cigar case, putting it together with Azek's copper whistle and Senor's gold coin. Seconds turned to minutes as he found it impossible to sleep due to anxiety. All he could do was rely on cogitation to force himself to sleep for a few hours. He woke up at a specific time and released Senor. This marionette's cold aura rapidly melded with the surroundings as the spirit-body threads collapsed inwardly, gradually turning black without any origins. It can still be controlled. Klein nodded indiscernibly and made the wraith use the stained glass windows high above and the bright stone floor tiles to arrive at the staircase that led to the keepers above. He believed that if Senor hadn't been contaminated ahead of time, making Cheney's Gate's core seal think of it as one of its own, it definitely would have reacted and cleansed it. How could a wraith have the ability to move freely in an Orthodox church's cathedral? And due to the tacit approval from the core seal and the disruption from the paper angel, the demigod-level archbishop that lived somewhere in the cathedral wasn't alerted. Under Klein's control, and using the sensations from the contamination, the invisible Senor slowly walked to the second floor before turning left and finding the residence of the keepers. It's Monday tomorrow. This week's Monday's shift is likely done by the keeper I met first. Klein had long figured out the roster, so he made the dark red-coated wraith stealthily pass through the wooden door and float into different rooms to identify the target. As there were only a few people inside, he quickly found the pale elder with loose facial skin, sparse hair, and a big nose. Senor immediately took out a sedative vial and placed it to the side. Then, before the keeper sensed anything, it possessed him. The keeper, who was in deep sleep, lost control over his body before he could even wake up to resist. All he could do was open his grayish-blue eyes and watch himself slowly pick up the vial and pull off the stopper. Then, he downed the liquid inside. His body convulsed abnormally as his organs seemed to be engaged in a violent struggle. After a full minute, he slowly went limp and closed his eyes again, entering a dreamless sleep. After doing all of this, Senor left the body of the keeper and used all kinds of mirror surfaces to leap back to the servants' quarters before entering Klein's body. Klein immediately emitted a cold, dead, and distant aura. Even showing an expression appeared to be difficult. He slowly got out of bed and silently left the servants' quarters. In the shadows and murals that weren't illuminated by the moonlight, he walked to the second floor and entered the target's room. Standing by the bedside, Klein, whilst in the appearance of a servant, slowly grew taller as his hair turned grey and sparse while his nose enlarged significantly. In just a few seconds, he looked identical to the keeper who just drank the sedative. Even his aura was identical. Changing into the black clergyman's coat that was placed to the side, Klein moved the keeper's and servant's clothes underneath the bed and laid down as he kept note of the time. At 5:30, he woke up ahead of time, finishing the white bread he had prepared the night before and drank a cup of water. He then looked quietly out the window. Just as day broke, Klein maintained his deadpan state and walked out the door. He went to the first floor, and following the path he had previously verified, he took a left turn. After walking for a moment, he wasn't surprised to see a priest. This was his experience as a former Nighthawk, therefore, Klein wasn't too worried that he couldn't find the path. The priest stood outside a secret door that led underground. As he raised his right hand, he tapped 4 times clockwise on his chest and said, "May the goddess bless you." "Praise the lady," Klein replied hoarsely and similarly drew a crimson moon. He didn't stay any longer and walked past the priest. Under the lamps that lined the walls, he walked down the staircase and arrived at the crossroads. Based on his understanding of his environment, Klein believed that turning right would leave the cathedral, and it would likely lead to the disguised security company or other organization belonging to the Nighthawks. Therefore, he didn't hesitate to turn left. At that moment, he saw a man wearing a red glove walk over. The casually dressed man had black hair and green eyes with handsome looks. He was none other than Leonard Mitchell.